The Cipher Brief, because national security is everyone's business. I do want to build on the issue of security around critical infrastructure now as I welcome CIG Principal and former Executive Director of the Cyberspace Solarian Commission, retired Vice Admiral Mark Montgomery. Mark, welcome. I bet you don't feel retired these days. I bet you feel as busy as ever.
I do, and I feel like a retired Rear Admiral for the most part. But yeah, it is a busy time, and with the NDAA just dropping now a lot of important cybersecurity legislation.
Yes, we could talk about that, and I know you're going to lead a session for us in just a moment. But first, I wanted to hit on an idea, if you don't mind, that you've had, one of several leading ideas in the cyberspace right now, and this one involves two really important things happening in the world right now. One is the need for stronger cybersecurity around critical infrastructure, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit more in a moment. And then the move by many businesses to the cloud. I mean, businesses are understanding, I think, more than they have ever in the past, how important it is to move those critical assets into the cloud. So how are these two things related, though, for you?
Thanks. This is exactly, and I would say, I wish this was all my ideas, but I've heard Chris Inglis over 3.5 years talk about this incessantly. It's the idea that, that we all have to make that investment to defend ourselves. We need a good public-private collaboration. It's been 23 years since Presidential Policy Directive 63 and the National Infrastructure Assurance Plan, which postulated the idea of a voluntary, partnership that would get us there. I think Chris would say it's the clinical definition of insanity to embark for a 24th year in a row on that purely voluntary basis to try to get ourselves to a safe and secure environment. So that really means you got to improve the private sector investment, and you have to do a better job as the government in providing support. And that first acknowledge a lot of good things have happened. We just haven't reached where you'd expect to be after 23 years of work. And the sector risk management agencies, and we'll talk about this in the next section a little bit, but I'll say we're doing a report right now on sector risk management agencies, and it won't be a surprise to the government because CIG did a report last year. The White House sat on for about a year and then just recently released it. That basically, it was in response to congressional ask. And they said, yeah, the sector risk management agencies are doing inconsistent, which is the most generous description I can have of it. I mean, there's a couple that are doing well, a couple that are doing average when graded on a curve, and a whole bunch of them that are doing poorly. And because the government, starting with the government not providing good support, but also it gets at the fact that the core documents driving sector risk management and who is a critical infrastructure are 9 years old now. And in cyber time, that's like 5 generations. So they're called Presidential Policy Directive 21 and Executive Order 13636. They were both signed on the same day in February of 2013. So almost 10 years ago now. They're woefully out of date. They don't even acknowledge the existence of CIG, as a critical player. But more than that, they don't address, what are the appropriate sectors. So it lists 16 critical infrastructures. Quietly we've added a 17th. We don't say it out loud. It's called election infrastructure. The Secretary of Homeland Security added that in 2018, but as he was allowed to at the time by fiat, and so we have 17 critical infrastructures. But what we don't have is a critical infrastructure for exactly what you're talking about, cloud. So stepping back, for those companies to get good, particularly medium-sized companies and small-sized companies, they have to be able to get on the cloud because the cloud is a good thing. It offers the opportunity to leverage significant investment, particularly by the big three. I mean, as much as we give them a hard time, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are all making significant investments in their ability to provide a secure environment. But we don't list the cloud as a critical infrastructure, and therefore we don't have that government interaction that I think is necessary. If we're going to encourage all the private sector to go to the cloud, we have to have that relationship. So our biggest, it's a very long-winded way of saying we absolutely need to update PPD 21, the Executive Order 13636. And the number one thing I would do in there is call cloud service providers a critical infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. And Mark, you of course spent a lot of time sort of helping direct policy under John McCain when he was at the Senate Armed Services Committee, and you were of course the executive director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. You're continuing to work against a lot of those recommendations that were made that haven't been implemented yet, and I know that that takes up a lot of your focus. But when it comes to these directives, being that you're in Washington, can you just kind of put into context with me why it takes a presidential directive or an executive directive for something like this? Just because it's sort of understanding the sausage. Why do we need it?
Well, look, there isn't a good reason for 9 years, but in general, the problem is the interagency coordination is so hard. We're watching it with Chris Inglis right now. Almost all of us know he had a quality national cyber strategy written in September. And with a cabinet level White House official driving it, it's still not released 3 months later, and I don't think it'll be released before January or February. So even when you have someone inside the White House on a singular maniacal issue, you know, who's been working it for 35 years of his life and is extremely well respected, he can't push it through the interagency process in less than 5 months. So what happens is when you decide, okay, I'm going to rework PPD 21, it would become a national security memorandum, an NSM with some number in the Biden administration. You know, probably Liz Sherwood-Randall and Caitlin Durkovich, the two senior officials who would be doing this, are looking at a year-long process that takes up a lot of the bandwidth of their office. So that's what happens is you make this decision, do I push this through now or do I do something else? Now, the president has directed them to rewrite PPD 21. He wrote a letter to Congress saying, I received this report from CISA, I've directed my staff to rewrite PPD 21. So I'm guessing it'll get done in a year, but it really took Congress saying, hey, Mr. President, have your team look at this, then come back to us with your recommendation. That happens, and then the president tells his team, hey, you better rewrite this. Well, you can't do that frequently. So if you're asking why it takes so long, because when there's a lot of other things to do, you know, hard things get pushed aside, and this is a hard thing. And I think without a congressional mandate like the National Security Strategy has or the National Defense Strategy have, those are both enshrined in law. Things can be pushed aside and take a decade instead of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and I think this is an issue too, Mark, and you're a contributor to the Cyber Initiatives Group New Digital Magazine that's coming out this week, and I encourage people to sign up for that if you'd like a copy of it at cyberinitiativesgroup.com. But that's one of the things that Chris Inglis has talked about. It's our lead feature story in this magazine about how he's expecting this national policy to be released within weeks or months, and that was 2 months ago. So I'm kind of like you are, hoping that it's sooner rather than later.
Well, definitely. I mean, I'm hoping it's soon. You know, I don't know that I've seen the latest version of it, but the versions I've seen are reasonably specific. I mean, I wish you could write a strategy that then has an implementation plan attached to it. But if you want to see an interagency, you know, jailbreak, you know, cage fit match, it would be putting an implementation plan on any document. In other words, telling agencies, I'm going to release to the public a list of things you should be held accountable for. You know, that's just, I did not describe the governing mantra of federal, you know, a federal government. You know, when I said, we're going to hold you, we're going to publish what you should be held accountable for. I'll give the Chinese credit. They put out their 5-year plans. You know, I'm not sure anybody holds them accountable in China, but still, you know, at least they put out their implementation plans. But seriously, on this, I think it'll be a good strategy. Whether it's effective or not, it'll be driven by Chris and his eventual successors' ability to implement it and to force agencies to do what they've been told to do.
That's a great lesson in how the sausage is made. I appreciate that, Mark. Thank you.